I have opinions and feelings. This is gonna be like a stupidly long video, and I apologize.
Welcome to another conversation. This week is, yes, choose. This week is Haunted Mansion Week.
Woo, mansion!
I don't know what that is. It's a big scary house, right? All the scary ghosts show up there. And
I wouldn't call them all scary.
And then there's the killer bride that's always been there. She just wasn't always scary and killer at first.
No. Honestly, the bride story could be an entire video.
Oh, that's rude.
There's a lot of history behind the Haunted Mansion. It is one of the most popular Disney attractions, and it is one of the most popular that is also not based on an intellectual property. It was an original concept when it opened, and it is one of my favorite rides. It always has been one of my favorite rides, despite the fact that I hate things that jump out at me. When I rode the ride as a child, once we got past the ballroom, I would turn and I would put my head on my dad's shoulder, and then he would tell me once we had left the graveyard, because I couldn't handle the pop-up ghosts. So I only saw the original bride one time. I was only brave enough to see her one time.
Didn't do much.
And then she left.
Plot of this ride in one sentence.
There is no official plot.
Yeah, there is. It's a retirement home for ghosts.
Oh.
That's it.
I wouldn't call that a plot. I'd call that a summation.
Okay. But what about all these plots that I read about online about these dads and daughters and sons and sailors and all sorts of stuff?
So fun fact, when there isn't a plot, people insist on making a plot fit.
Ooh, is that called fan fiction?
It is called fan fiction. Unfortunately, sometimes fan fiction has been given a budget. See the Haunted Mansion movie and the new extended interactive queue at Walt Disney World. Both of those fall in that category. There were a lot of decisions that were made when the mansion first opened that were inside jokes and references to the people who developed it that have taken on a life of their own and become their own mythology. They accidentally created way more than they anticipated.
This is the problem with an attraction like this, is when you don't have a concise story that says this is this thing and this is who these characters are and this is what happens on this ride. It leaves a lot open for interpretation, and people say, I can interpret that how I want, and therefore what I say is true, and I'm like, stop.
I don't mind people coming up with various interpretations. It's the people saying, well, this is clearly correct.
Yeah.
There is no correct answer. Has this ghost spoken to you? This is like analyzing literature or analyzing a piece of art. What the person who created it intended is not necessarily what the person viewing it is going to get out of it. In the same vein that books belong to their readers, rides belong to their riders. The attraction went through several reworkings, kind of the ride equivalent of production hell.
Well, it went through a lot of the same stuff that Pirates did.
Because they were in development at the same time.
Yeah, because they both started as walkthrough attractions. One of them, they both started as wax museum type attractions, right? Or did the Haunted Mansion started as a walkthrough, like a scary like museum?
No, the Haunted Mansion started as a special effects scary walkthrough. The museum aspect was a much later thing. That was the Museum of the Weird, and that was almost a separate concept.
Okay.
It was Ken Anderson and Claude Coates that did a lot of the original concept work. Ken Anderson did the first major piece of concept art that you see of the mansion. The one where the levels don't line up.
Hi.
There are a lot of books published about the Haunted Mansion's history. There are a lot of really fantastic websites. I was that person when I was 13. I was obsessed with some of those books and websites. I had an email address through doombuggies.com at one point in time. It was my junk mail address that my mother did not know about. I really didn't ever really use it. I just kind of had it to have the thrill of having a secret email address. And because I wanted one that said Doom Buggies, and then literally never used it.
How involved was Walt in the beginning process, and how much of Walt's original vision was transitioned into what the attraction eventually became?
He was definitely involved, and it's the reason that the outside of the mansion is kept pretty. He said he wanted the outside kept clean, and the inside the ghosts would take care of. He did a lot of the early concept, like, pitches and such. He was involved in that. He wasn't sure what direction he wanted it to go, which is why there were really two creative camps. There was the Mark Davis, I want this to be silly and fun camp, and the Claude Coates, I want this to have a genuinely dark tone. And Walt was still kind of like waffling back and forth on which one he was interested in, and then he died. Super inconveniently. Don't smoke. Smoking kills. And you were left with this void, and neither side was willing to give up because they both felt that they had Walt's seal of approval on their design, which is why the mansion has the tone that it does. You can really kind of split the ride into two halves. There's the first half, which is the Claude Coates, atmospheric. You don't really see the ghosts, but you can tell that they're there. And then you have the second half, the ballroom is really the split. And then you have the second half where all of the ghosts are physically present, and they're very comedic, and they're there to have a good time, and they've got this bouncy, fun little theme song. The lyrics were written by X Atencio. X did the lyrics for both Grim Grinning Ghosts and for Pirate's Life for Me, and he wrote the scripts for both of them. If you're familiar with the parks, you've heard his voice. He is the breakdown spiel for Mansion, and in California, he is the talking skeleton head before you go over the drop on Pirates. With Grim Grinning Ghosts, and Buddy Baker wrote the music, they managed to find that balance where the lyrics reflect the Mark Davis fun and bouncy side, but when played at the beginning, it is very dark and fits the Claude Coates tone very, very well. So Grim Grinning Ghosts really is a nice summation of the entire Mansion experience.
By far the best version of that song that really balances it out for me is the Disneyland sing-along version. I'm gonna keep saying it every time.
Both Pirates and Mansion are short songs, and so is Small World. A lot of these attraction songs run anywhere between 1 to 2 minutes. Pirates is a 1 minute song, and it feels a 1 minute song when you listen to it for long enough. Grim Grinning Ghosts has a few more movements to it. It has a bit more of a dynamic, whereas Pirates is really kind of the same. And it just loops like that, whereas like Grim Grinning Ghosts does get its own like flow and story to it. When you look at the Phantom Manor soundtrack, it takes on a whole different life of its own, both through the opera stylings of the voice of the bride and through the full orchestration of this, what is at its core a simple piece of music, but again, like, it depends on how it's done up.
Now, Phantom Manor has a completely separate storyline using
100% different storyline. I mean, there's a reason it's named Phantom Manor and not Haunted Mansion. It really is a separate attraction. It's built on a lot of the same foundation, but it's the, okay, this time we're going in as one solid creative team instead of two different warring sides.
Yeah.
And for some parts of it, that makes it stronger, and for some parts of it, it makes it a little weaker. It's not maintained well. The lighting isn't very good. The maintenance isn't kept up. With a lot of things in the park are not kept up. Mystic Manor is the Hong Kong equivalent, and is completely different. Like, completely different, because Chinese culture's view on ghosts and death is super different, so they said, let's not offend a whole bunch of people. Tokyo got a very similar mansion to Florida's mansion. The mansion is really interesting in that it's a similar attraction that is in a different land in every one of the parks. Europe is fascinated by Wild West stories in the same way that the US is fascinated with castles and princesses. It's a thing you didn't have, so it seems that much more fantastical. So Frontierland in Paris has a much more cohesive storyline. The Thunder Mountain backstory and the Phantom Manor backstory line up, and they go hand in hand, and that's part of why Phantom has a more solid story structure underneath it, is because it had to be able to fit in with Thunder Mountain and fit the overall land, where Mansion in Florida is a part of Liberty Square, so it feels very New Englandy. California Mansion is a part of New Orleans Square and has a much more Southern Gothic feel to it. Like, they're very, while there's a lot of things that are really similar inside, the exteriors could not be more different. And then Tokyo, it's in Fantasyland, because dead people are a fantasy. It started as a walkthrough attraction, and it was going to be small groups of people that were walked through with a guide, and then at various times the guide was going to have more or less of a story and plot involvement, or just feel like, I'm guiding you from room to room. At one point, there was the guide was going to get kidnapped and replaced by a ghost part way through, which is something that you pick up later.
Get with the tour in Disneyland.
The
that doesn't
Ghost
exist
Relations tour at Disneyland.
Think about the other attractions that used that format. You had the castle tour, the mystery
Cinderella
castle
mystery tour
in Japan, and then you have, even now when you have Enchanted Tales with Belle. Can you imagine the line for something like Mansion if it was a walkthrough attraction? That line
A pulsed
would be,
walkthrough attraction, yes.
that line would be 5 years long.
Especially because some of the effects had a really extended reset time, and that's part of why they dropped the process. There were a lot of effects, and there are some things that are in the mansion that are left over from its walkthrough days. When you pass the corridor of doors, when you look down the endless hallway as you start on the corridor of doors, there is right now it just kind of feels like a random AC vent, but that's supposed to be the cold air of a ghost passing you, which is a much more interesting effect when you're standing still.
And not fun when you get stuck.
Oh yeah, no, that was cute. Mansion got the Omnimover system because of Adventures Through Inner Space.
I was gonna say, this was not the first time they
Adventures Through Inner Space was the first Omnimover. It allowed them to make Mansion a more cinematic experience than Pirates of the Caribbean because it's like a camera. You can pick your shot, you can pick your timing, you have a lot more control over what the guest is looking at compared to Pirates, where it's just open boat and you have to like hope they look in the direction you want them to look.
Paul Frees is one of my favorite people. Who is a wonderful actor and voiceover artist that's done a multitude of different projects. Paul Frees also did a lot of the advertising work on it for like radio ads and everything. So it's funny listening
the radio dramas
when you listen to the soundtrack with all of those demos on it and all of those actual ads. You start to I hear all of his different voices, and I'm like, oh, that's his Jack Frost voice, and oh, that's his Burgermeister voice, and which is basically what I heard the first time I wrote it. I was unfamiliar with anything with Haunted Mansion when I first came to Disney.
Really?
So I came in and I was like, why does this sound like Burgermeister Meisterburger? And I was like, oh, that's why.
See,
that
I was
sense.
on Mansion so much earlier than I encountered any of the other stuff that didn't even occur to me. Eleanor Audley is the voice of Madame Leota. She is a very recognizable Disney voice, as she is the voice of both Lady Tremaine in Cinderella, which released in 1950, and she is the voice of Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty, which released in 1959. The Mansion opened in 1969. So, I mean, that's a pretty solid chunk of time that she figured out where that steady paycheck was and was like, let's keep going on this. However, Eleanor Audley is not the face of Madame Leota. Leota is a combination of two people. The face for Madame Leota is Imagineer Leota Toombs, which, can you get a better name than that? Leota Toombs was one of the only female Imagineers alongside Alice Davis and Harriet Burns that did a lot of the early creative work. There weren't as many women. There were some, which is exciting, but there were not as many. She provided the face for Madame Leota in The Crystal Ball, and she provided both face and voice for Little Leota at the end, which is why there's all kinds of crazy theories about them being related, because it is in fact the same face. So I'll give you that.
Yeah. Paris originally had Vincent Price.
It's so good. Go listen to the recording. It's just the best.
It's not there anymore. Is the whole thing in French now?
Yes, the whole thing's in French except the laugh.
They kept going back and forth on that ride for quite some time trying to figure out what they wanted it to be. There are a lot of effects that happen on the ride.
The biggest single effect that's used and the most effective effect that's used is the Pepper's Ghost illusion. Pepper's Ghost is an illusion that was used in Victorian theater, and the ballroom in the mansion is the largest example of that worldwide. It has some of the largest pieces of glass. They had to install the glass before the roof was put on the building. California actually has a big spider and spider web in the corner of one of the pieces of glass because a guest brought a gun in and shot it, and they couldn't replace the entire piece of glass without removing the roof again, so they made it look like a spider web. People are the reason we can't have nice things. Now, when you look into the history of the Haunted Mansion, there are all kinds of weird pieces of urban legends and myths and things that have trickled in over the course of time because it's been so long and there was such secrecy around it. The building was built and sat empty for about 2 years in the park while everybody was like, what's gonna be in here? What's it gonna be? And so rumors ran absolutely rampant.
Which was good for marketing.
Which was good for marketing, but it was because of all of the creative gridlock that happened when Walt passed. Now, when the attraction opened, there was a ghost called the Hatbox Ghost. It was an effect that didn't work very well, and it was only in for less than a month after opening. However, because it was in the late 60s, there really wasn't a lot of like photo and video evidence of rides in the same way that there is now, because people's cameras weren't that good and most people didn't have them. They were expensive and you didn't lug them to a park. So for a long time, the Hatbox Ghost was this like
Urban
rumor
legend,
and like,
yeah.
was there really a ghost that was only there for like a hot second? And then photographs surfaced and people lost their minds, and some people said it was doctored, and the fans like ripped each other to shreds on the internet.
It's so funny
Thanks,
watching
internet.
it. Yeah.
And
I remember when all that.
eventually Disney confirmed that had been a ghost. He was used in promotional pictures,
Yeah.
which is why it was like, but where is this thing? They have changed the way that the effect works, and it now works the way it was originally intended, because technology has caught up to where it needed to be. The idea being that the head would appear and disappear between the Hatbox Ghost's body and the hat box that he is carrying. They can now do that via projection, when they originally just had lighting, but because the figure was too close to the track, the lighting effect didn't work and you could see both heads at both times.
Yeah.
So now he's a big marketing ploy.
Another legend that your mom witnessed in person
Yes.
was the knight.
The knight in shining armor, as you could call him.
Oh, that was only Disneyland?
That was only Disneyland. Florida's never had that. There was a knight that was originally a cast member staffed position and would like jump out and scare people. It was the only case of a person being involved in an effect. They had an emergency stop button on them, and they had to use it frequently because people would attack him, or women would throw their purses and they needed the purse back, so they had to keep stopping the ride. They also caught teenagers making out like constantly. For a long time, the effect was only used for special events. My mom saw it during Orange County Fireman's Night, where it was only local people in the park, and it was an after-hours party, and the knight moved, and my grandmother refused to ever ride it again because that thing had never moved. And then it did, like, 15 years after the ride opened, and she could never trust it again. That is no longer, I mean, I can't even imagine, I can't believe that was even a thing now with all of the policies and procedures about people being near a moving ride vehicle, which makes sense.
Sounds like a California thing, though. Like, they can do so much.
There is now an animatronic inside of the suit of armor to make it kind of move and kick periodically, so there is no way for someone to get back into that suit of armor. It has been fitted to no longer be capable of that. The one in Florida was never made to do that. It was made from the beginning to be a still figure, which is why our suit of armor is smaller and has like a gonzo hooked nose.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to look more fantastical than the functional suit of armor did in California.
Yeah.
I saw something in Florida that very, very few people have seen, and I thought that I had made it up until I got it confirmed by a longtime cast member.
It was a person walking around.
It was a person walking around. So when you look down the endless hallway, there are 3 sets of doors. The third set of doors is a functional set of doors, and at one point in time, both doors were left unlocked. There was a maintenance cast member who adored the mansion, and he had a top hat and a cape that he would hide next to one of the doors, and he would put it on, and he would just walk periodically back and forth between the doors. Now, at that point in time, the cast members in the location, the coordinator, the lead, would take a ride through once an hour to double check that all the effects were working and confirm everything. So the maintenance guy would stop by the break room and be like, okay, like when did they do their hour ride? And if they had just done it, he would go in and he would make a couple of passes. He always made sure that it wasn't something that could get caught, but also like everyone knew about it. It was kind of one of those like in between things. I saw that as a child. I thought that I'd made it up. I kind of remember it a little, like, I remember the details as they're told to me, but like my mind made it 10 times more intense. I thought he was way closer to the vehicle than he was. And I screamed bloody murder, and like, again, almost did never trust the ride again. But then later people convinced me.
And then backstage, she's probably like, hey,
but
that
people
girl
convinced
screamed.
me that I was making it up. I could
Because
never find a
there's
description
never-
of it. So I took the tour. The woman who took us on the tour had been there for just decades, and she explained, and she had told us at the beginning, like, do not interrupt me. Like, let me tell my stories. I will let you ask questions at the end. Like, but do not interrupt me. She'd been doing this forever, so she could do that. And she described him in the top hat and the cape, and I went, I saw that. And she looked, and I was like, I saw that as a kid, and everyone's always told me I'm crazy, and I could never find anything to back it up. And she said, you're one of 3 people I've ever found that actually saw it happen. So like, to have that validated was huge. The mansion has seen a lot of updates over time as Disney has tried to retrofit a story into it.
Well, Let's start with the effects that have been added to improve the attraction. I think Madame Leota floating is a fantastic
That's a huge
addition.
one. That's that they wanted it to have done it in the first place, and they just didn't have the technology at the time. So once the technology became available,
It makes complete
boom,
sense.
go for it, do it, like make the thing happen.
And then there's been a lot of paint work and tweaks and lighting effects, and now we're switching to LEDs. So
LEDs are a huge step forward for attractions. They last longer, they give you clearer colors, and they use up less energy. So boom,
Yeah.
LEDs, they made the world of difference to the Enchanted Tiki Room. Holy crap.
But then you have things like you took out one bride and put in a different bride with a killing backstory, and what?
She's bride number 4.
4?
There were several bride designs. One bride design was just a black face with glowing eyes.
Okay.
She's had several designs.
Yes, okay.
But this was the first one to get a name and backstory. But there were 3 or 4 prior brides. And some
Which have
of the
no-
fan backstories
Yeah.
give them separate identities, and some of them
I've
do
heard
not.
Emily, I've heard Elizabeth.
Emily
I've
is
heard-
the most common one, and that's generally considered the blue-faced one.
which is the one pre.
That's the pre-Constance one, yes.
Were there any given stories from Disney
Never officially.
Imagineers or anything? It's just there's a bride and here we go.
Yes, there at one point.
How do you do that?
The
This
bride-
is why fans go stupid.
The bride prior to Constance, the ghosts that popped up in the attic said "I do," indicating that they were former grooms,
Oh, okay.
and that was our "I do." It also depended on how the audio levels were mixed, and that's something
Yeah.
that will
Changes all
vary on a regular basis depending on what speakers are working, what aren't, what the settings are like. What happened to the bride comes down to the fact that there were several different creative teams working on the ride at the same time, and bits and pieces of each one's story got thrown out until the leftover pieces didn't make sense anymore.
That makes sense.
The mansion in California was originally supposed to be tied to Pirates of the Caribbean
Because they're
through
on the same land.
pirates through Jean Lafayette. The only thing that's left is there's a grate and sewer system along the edges of the river in New Orleans Square that was supposed to connect to that walkthrough attraction. There is an absolutely spectacular blog called Long Forgotten that does the most in-depth analysis of the Haunted Mansion I have ever found. The guy that writes it is a theology professor, so that's the way he approaches this thing.
That's cool.
And it's just, the detail level is extraordinary. If I had to direct you to 2 websites, it's doombuggies.com and it's Long Forgotten. They are both spectacular. There was supposed to be, and then there was a couple of different plots. There was one about the pirate captain Gore that got picked up and dropped several times. There was the family manor story that gets picked up and dropped a couple of times, which is what most of the Gracie story is based off of, are the bits and pieces that were left behind.
Yeah, and I've heard all sorts of different things about there was the Master Gracie was a sailor and then left, and Madame and the bride is waiting for him to come back, which is kind of a bit of that translated into Phantom Manor, and then Madame Leota was a third, there was a love triangle and all sorts. I was please stop. I love Madame Leota's character because you have some people that are she's just fun and the Wizard of Oz, and you have some people that are she's really dark and she's a witch and she's crazy, and then you have, I feel she's kind of like Catwoman.
She's chaotic.
Yeah,
She's a force of chaos.
She wants things done a specific way, and she'll play the sides that she needs to get what she wants. She's not really inherently good or bad. She's Madame Leota.
Chaotic neutral.
Yeah. And that's how I view her.
Yeah, I've read a lot of there's a collection of backstories that kind of became considered the official-ish version that was cobbled together by cast members that had worked there.
Oh.
That was kind of everybody contributed bits and pieces trying to make sense of this. Again, humans like patterns, and humans like to fit things into a narrative, and it's the reason that we see shapes in clouds, and it's the reason that we act like animals are capable of carrying on a conversation when we're telling a story. And when you are left with a bunch of random pieces, the human brain will force in a narrative whether or not it fits.
Yeah.
A really fantastic example of this is out in front of the Haunted Mansion in California. There was, the way the gates close usually at Disney is there's the big gate and then there's a little metal pole that pops into a hole. Well, there was a hole there that was the hole that the pole popped into, but they ended up changing a gate, so they paved in the hole so that it couldn't get filled up and tripped on. That ended up, it's a circle with a little square on one side. People assumed it was a ring. It's too small to be a ring. It never was a ring. But people ended up making up these crazy stories about the bride who threw the ring from the attic, and that's why she's up there. And like, it spiraled out of control. It was never a ring in the pavement. It was a piece of hardware left behind. But people were so desperate to find a story, and to find a story that fit, that they would take any scrap of material and turn it into a full story. Now, in bringing that all the way around to the fan fiction gets a budget, when you look at the Walt Disney World Mansion, you have this interactive queue. And it has a lot of references to Imagineers that didn't get tombstones on the original pass. The tombstones kind of function like the credits for the ride. And there are some really excellent tributes in there, and I love that part of it. But they also played up a bunch of these fan theories that don't have any basis in the original mansion. And there is a ring set into the pavement that ties all the way, and it's an actual ring set into the pavement that ties all the way back around to this. There's a big crypt that like spews water because it's interactive, whatever, that goes all the way and is one of the original pirate stories that was supposed to have been there in the Haunted Mansion. Like, the crypt that has the musical instruments has a one-eyed black cat that you hear mentioned in a lot of the demo recordings. Like, when they built the extended queue, they said, we want to take all these things that didn't make it into the mansion and cram them in, not realizing that the reason that they were cut from the Haunted Mansion was because they didn't work. There's a reason that they were cut. So by cramming them into the queue, you've lost a lot of things. One, you've lost Walt's original vision of the outside being well maintained and the ghosts take care of the inside. You've allowed the outside to creep out. You also find so when you turn the corner into the interactive queue, you have 5 busts, and it's supposed to be, or you've got, I say 5 busts, one of them is 2 people. You've got the 5 like memorials, and the idea is that it's a set of riddles and everyone killed everyone else. The problem is 2 of those busts are children. There are no dead children in the Haunted Mansion. None. Yeah. And there is also no religious imagery, which is a heck of an accomplishment. The only cross you will see is the pet cemetery in California that was added later. There are no crosses in the Haunted Mansion. They managed to do an entire ride about the afterlife without offending anyone's religion.
Yeah.
Well done, but more importantly, there are no children in the Haunted Mansion. Dead children is not something people want to think about on vacation. Dead adults, I mean, that happens, it's sad, but we move on. Dead children is not funny. Like, ever. So thematically, they don't fit. That's also the issue that I have with Constance the Bride. Everyone inside the mansion is dead, yes. And sometimes you're like, somebody killed someone else, but it's not cold-blooded murder. Constance is cold-blooded murder. Pre-planned, done for selfish reasons, murder. You acknowledge that other people killed each other, because like you have the ghosts at the end, you have the 2 dueling ghosts, and you have the ghosts at the end, which are the hangman and the man holding the noose. But those are played for comedy. Constance is not played for comedy.
Yeah.
And she's a cold-blooded murderer in a way that no one else is. Her motives are made clear.
And she also has a dumb face.
She has a dumb face. She has an effect that doesn't work. She has an attempt at shoehorning in a plot that does not fit.
My issue is, you have an attraction that doesn't have a plot and has those broken pieces like you said. But then, exactly, when adding a character, they think we're fixing this plot, and it just confuses the writer even more.
It's the difference between
no sense.
The Mansion Updates and Phantom Manor. They took the same broken pieces, but then they put in a cohesive story that tied the whole thing together. Florida, they just tried to shoehorn it in without changing the other elements.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. But before we wrap up this history video, I'm going to tell you my absolute favorite story from the development of the Haunted Mansion. So Yale Gracie and a couple of the other Imagineers were basically given free reign while they were attempting to figure out how to do all of the different special effects.
So that way they could come up with different things.
So they can play with things, both traditional things like Pepper's Ghost and new things that no one had ever seen before. And they worked in one room for the most part, and they had all of their things set up. And there were lots of motion sensors and things because they were testing them. Well, the custodial crew for the building said, hey, it's kind of creepy in there. We need you to leave the lights on so that when we go in, we can get it clean for you, but like, it's creepy, we need the lights on. You don't tell that to a whole group of people testing special effects that want to know how people react. They set it up so that every motion sensor was prepared. When they came back the next morning, the lights were on, every effect was moving, and there was a broom in the middle of the room. Poor custodial guy had come in, started to clean, every one of the motion sensors tripped, all of the lights cut out, every figure started to move, Lights started going off, music, sound effects, they rigged the whole room.
It's so funny.
They come back, they find everything running in a broom in the middle of the floor, and the next day they got a note from Custodial that said, "You are on your own, you clean your own room." And they had to clean their own room out for the rest of the development time because they pulled a fantastic prank. That is my favorite mansion development story. Favorite story, hands down. And that's why Gracie has the biggest tombstone.
Yeah. That's like me and you working on something and calling Irene
right?
over
That's
to,
why
like,
I'm it's funny because it's hard as someone who was born so long after the development of some of these iconic attractions and parks. These people are like gods to us. Like they're built up in all of the documentation as just being these fabulous creative people that were incredible.
They're just fun
But you have to
people.
remember that they're people. They're real people. And they're real people who pulled a prank and then had to sweep their own room for the rest of the year afterwards. And
so funny.
That's important to me.
Do you have a specific ghost that's your favorite out there? Because I know there are a lot in the graveyard.
There's 999 of them to choose from. I'm sure everyone has a different favorite. Did I skip a section you wanted me to talk about? Because I definitely bounced around really badly with my ADHD, and I apologize, and I probably skipped stuff that I would have liked to talk about. I could talk about this for hours. Maybe I will at some point. Maybe I'll just make a long video by myself of me just babbling about the Haunted Mansion.
I think other than the Hatbox Ghost, because he's just so beautifully executed after seeing
He is
him in
now,
person.
yes.
I think my favorite ghosts are the opera singers because they're so ridiculous and extra for no reason.
Fun fact, the opera singer that is at the end of the ride is the same opera voice that does the original music for the Star Trek opener. Honestly, I think I'm gonna go with the busts that follow you.
Yeah.
It's a basic effect, but it is so effective. You know exactly how it works, and it still works. There's a lot of effects that once you know how it works, you see through it.
Yeah.
Pepper's Ghost. And
even still, that's still ineffective.
literally, yeah. But the busts, that freaked me out as a kid. I thought I had been singled out, and I was simultaneously thrilled that I was special and terrified because they were looking at me.
Yeah. So thank you so much for watching. What do you want them to do?
I want you to like this video, share this video, subscribe to our channel, press the bell for the notifications.
Ding-a-ling.
Press the bell for the notifications.
Follow.
Like us on Facebook for regular updates. Follow us on Instagram for irregular updates. That's my fault. And support us on Patreon. Our Patreon supporters have options of how much support they want to give each month. And the top tier of support gets an exclusive web series, Lit for Lit. We're reading Twilight right now while drinking. Eric is also now providing voice work.
Oh, I am.
With mixed results.
Yeah,
I'd say mixed results. Some of those voices are great and some of them,
Well, thank you so much for watching this video. We'll probably do more mansion stuff in the future because there's
I could talk
so
about
much
it
to talk
forever.
about. Maybe we'll pick maybe next year we'll do a Haunted Mansion week and we'll pick a specific ghost or figure and talk about their backstory and the rumors we've heard about them, and maybe we'll do an entire episode about Madame Leota or an entire episode about cake. There's an entire you'll see a bit on our Friday episode. There's an entire bit about me analyzing this cake that they're eating, and I just don't understand.
You get hung up on that cake.
Yeah.